Before sunrise on Route 66, campfires glowed beside packed jalopies. The smell of beans and cornbread drifted through cold air as families cooked with what little they had: flour, onions, coffee, and hope. These are the 25 Dust Bowl migrant meals that carried thousands west, one skillet at a time. 1. Pinto beans with cornbread. A dented pot of pintos bubbles low while a greased skillet bakes cornmeal to a crackling crust, onions, and a scrap of salt pork. If they had it, turn water into broth and beans into supper. Dry beans and meal rode west in sacks, steady against heat and dust, feeding. Whole carloads night after night. A ladle clinks, steam rises, and a square of cornbread soaks the pot liquor. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, filling, and shareable, exactly what a roadside camp needed. 1 pot, 1 pan, many bowls, with the last scoop saved for tomorrow's start. 2 fried potatoes and onions. A black skillet meat, sliced potatoes and onion, browned slow in saved bacon fat or spooned lard. The trick was patience, edges crisped while centers stayed soft. A reliable plate that tasted like home no matter how far the mile markers ran. Potatoes traveled well. Onions waited in roadside crates, served alone or beside beans. The pan came to the blanket hot and hissing. Salt, a little pepper, maybe coffee on the fire. Simple comfort after wind, grit, and long fixes under a tired car. For a few minutes, everyone ate in quiet, then talked again. 3. Cornmeal mush fried next day. At night, cornmeal simmered thick and careful, poured into a pan to set. By morning, the slab, cut clean into slices that browned in the skillet, crisp outside and tender within. 1 bag of meal made to meals, sometimes 3, stretching coins while giving hands something warm to hold. Dizzled with a scrap of syrup, dipped in coffee, or topped with gravy if luck turned. Fried mush kept spirits level. The rhythm mattered: boil, chill, slice, fry. In the logbook of hard travel, this was thrift done right, quiet, steady, and better than it had to be. 4 milk gravy over biscuits or bread. Flour met fat in the pan, milk followed, and pepper made itself known. Poured over day-old biscuits or heel slices, the white gravy turned dry bread into something like sundae. Government flour, a little milk, and saved drippings made the math work when wages didn't. Gravy meant the cook still had a trick left, a way to turn scraps into comfort. Plates came clean, talk loosened, the road felt shorter. Even when meat was missing, the smell said, "You're cared for a camp of the tired and hopeful." That was enough. 5. Hoover stew, a pot of canned tomatoes and corn came first. Elbows and hot dog coins followed. The whole thing simmered into a red, friendly tangle that fed children fast and let adults breathe. Relief lines offered shelf goods. Francs fit the budget. 1 pot traveled easily from grate 2. Ground bowls went out in quick hands, steam lifting into dusk. Nobody pretended it was feast day, just a make-do mix that kept bellies full and tempers even. In the dictionary of the 30s, Hoover stew translated to survival with a wink. Not perfect, but hot, and here, tonight. 6. Mulligans to hobo pot. Into a blackened kettle went whatever the camp could spare. Potato dice, onion ends, carrot nubs, a heel of cabbage, maybe a coin of fatback or a can of tomatoes. Water covered it, the fire stayed low, a coffee tin became the ladle. Someone stirred with a crate-slat spoon until the edges softened and the flavors met in the middle. It worked because everyone brought something bartered, scrounged, or saved. A hobo code chalked on a fence meant friendly yard, clean well, watchful dog. The stew stretched because the circle did. Bunkhouse men, mothers with children, farm hands between jobs, a shake of salt, a pepper scrap, and the pot answered hunger. Meaning lived at the fire ring. Stories traded hands faster than bowls, and the first scoop went to elders or kids. The stew tasted different every night and exactly the same: warm, generous, a little smoky. When the kettle emptied, coals settled, and tomorrow felt possible. Again. 7. Navy bean soup. White beans swelled in a dented pot, no soak if time ran short. Onion and bay went in. Maybe a rind from salt pork or a spoon of drippings, then a long, patient simmer until broth turned silky and beans gave under the ladle. A square of cornbread or heel of bread finished. The bowl, Relief stores and church pantries offered beans by the sack. They travelled, kept, and didn't argue with weather. A thermos tucked under an arm road to day labour, fence mending, or road crews. Back at camp, the remaining pot reheated without complaint, feeding late, arrivals, and the cook who finally sat down. It was quiet fuel, steady, not showy, the kind that kept hands warm and heads clear. Kids learned to blow across the spoon, adults salted once and fell silent. When the lid clinked shut, someone always asked if there'd be enough for morning. Usually, there was beans. 8 vegetable beef soup bone broth style, a browned beef bone started the pot, laying down a roasted note before potatoes, carrots, cabbage, and maybe a fist of barley slid in. The kettle went to a low burble, the bone giving up its best while vegetables softened and the broth turned from clear to honest bread heels. Waited to catch the shine. Soup bones cost pennies at the butcher. Vegetable coals came cheap from stalls closing at dusk. A splash of vinegar woke the pot if it dulled, and long simmering made even stubborn cabbage sweet. The fire didn't need to be fierce, only faithful, and that small mercy mattered. When fuel was thin, steam fogged windows, spectacles, and tempers. The soup lined bowls from oldest to youngest, and the bone, picked clean, promised a second boil for tomorrow. In dust country, a pot like this did more than feed. It lowered shoulders and made rooms feel less temporary, if only for an hour. 9. Split pea soup with hambone. Green peas fell apart on purpose, turning the kettle into velvet. A hambone or knuckle went in whole, onion and a scrap of carrot followed. The simmer smoothed everything until a wooden spoon stood almost upright. Salt waited until the end, and pepper wrote a little warmth across the top. Peas were inexpensive and forgiving. Bones arrived by butcher goodwill or after holiday luck. The soup didn't mind reheating, didn't mind travel, and didn't mind being stretched with water and a pinch more salt. For camps counting matches and pennies, that kind of cooperation from a pot was worth remembering. Bowls came back scraped clean, the line looping once more. Kids called it green glue and grinned, adults called it supper and breathed easier. When the bone finally retired, it still flavoured a small pot of beans. Nothing wasted, everything used, everyone warmer than before. That was the bargain. 10 chili beans with crackers, a skillet browned what meat could be spared or none, then tomatoes, onion, and chili powder built a mild, brick red base. Beans carried the load, thickening the pot into something that hugged a spoon without clinging. Saltines rode the rim, ready to crumble, and a coffee. Canned tomatoes and beans were standard in missions and lunch counters. Crackers came cheap by the sleeve. Meat stayed modest, spice stayed friendly, and the rhythm stayed fast, enough to serve lines without fraying nerves. The pot held on a back flame all evening, welcoming late workers and wanderers. Saturday tasted like this in a lot of towns, warm, simple, just spirited enough to feel like a treat. Laughter rose easier over chili, and arguments cooled. When the last crumbs of cracker dusted the table, the cook rinsed the pot and set it back on the hook, thinking about tomorrow's beans. 11. Flapjacks with sorghum or syrup. Griddle heat made a simple batter sourdough if the camp kept a crock alive, baking powder cakes if not. A dab of saved fat slicked the plate, batter spread, bubbled, and flipped once. The cakes browned quick, edges lacy, centers tender, a tin cup drizzled sorghum or thin syrup, stretching sweetness across a stack. Why it made sense was math and morale. Flour, salt, and leaven were cheap, portable, and forgiving. A spoon of fat did the rest. Sorghum poured slowly and tasted big, so a little felt like plenty. Pancakes cooked fast, fed a crowd, and used one skillet, which mattered when fuel and soap ran tight. Meeting arrived with the first forkful. Flapjacks made the camp smell like a diner, not a dusted siding. Men ate standing, talking softer than usual. Someone bragged about a starter older than he was. Someone else swore a single pancake could patch a roof. Either way, bellies warmed and tempers eased. 12. Fried bologna or peanut butter sandwiches on lean days. A skillet hissed with bologna rounds, edges curling into cupped frills. The slices met soft bread with mustard or onion, stacked to high and wrapped in newsprint. Other days, peanut butter spread thick, then a drizzle of syrup or a spoon of honey sealed. The deal, sweet cutting the dust. It made sense because both options travelled and kept. Bologna was cheap protein from the grocer, fried hot to taste like more. Peanut butter needed no ice, filled hard, and didn't mind a ride in a pail. Bread ends, store loaves, or biscuit splits held everything in place and kept hands moving. Meaning was portability and pride. A pocket sandwich meant you could keep fencing, picking, or walking the line without stopping the day. Kids traded halves at the siding, adults swapped bites and stories. Grease stains marked the paper like a signature, not fancy, not fragile, exactly enough to go on. 13. Dandelion or poke greens with pot liquor. Spring's first green showed in ditches and along fence posts. Hands gathered dandelion and, where folks knew the plant, poke shoots properly boiled. Greens wilted in a pot with onion, a bit of salt, and any scrap of pork. The broth pot liquor was ladled over cornbread, turning bitterness into a warm, savoury shine. Why it made sense was the calendar. After winter's starch and cans, foraging filled vitamins and stretched groceries without touching the purse. A single rind of fatback flavoured a whole pot. Without it, onions and salt still did good work. The fire was already lit for coffee, so the kettle earned its keep. Meaning was season and skill. Knowing which plants to pick and how to tame them felt like wealth. The first spoonful woke tongues and shoulders. You could taste the thaw, the promise of gardens to come. Bowls emptied fast, and someone joked the ditches were bare because supper had passed through. 14. Rabbit or jackrabbit stew. Protein walked on for legs and paused in fields at dusk. A point to cartridge or a loop snare turned luck into dinner. Rabbit browned in a kettle, onions followed, then potatoes and water. Time did the tenderizing. When the lid lifted, meat slipped from bone into a gravy that begged for bread. It made sense because game cost sweat, not cash, and plains rabbits were plenty. Ammunition stayed cheap, snares cost wire and patience. A single animal flavoured a family. Pot, to fed the camp, offcuts that might scare a city table became prized, and every rib and shank gave up something good. Meaning was self-reliance without boasting. Bringing in a rabbit felt like winning a wage, especially when jobs thinned. Kids learned to dress game with respect, elders seasoned by, feel, the tasted of smoke and responsibility. When the last spoon scraped the pot, someone thanked the country out loud. 15. Ash-baked potatoes and onions. With coals already glowing, whole potatoes and onions tucked into the ash. A turn with a stick, a patient wait, and their jackets charred while insides steamed to sweetness. A crack against a palm split the spud, salt, pepper, and a thumb of fat or sorghum finished supper. With no pans to scrub, it made sense because fire did double duty warming bodies, then cooking without extra fuel. Potatoes and onions travelled well, shrug off rough handling, and lasted in burlap. No kettle meant no washing, a blessing where water ran scarce. Even the char, scraped away, told a story of thrift made tasty. Meaning was ease and evening. Folks circled the pit, hands out to the heat, talking about tomorrow's wind. Steam met cold air, faces lit in ember light, and the simplest food felt ceremonial. A hot potato in your hands promised sleep would come easy and morning would have something to build on. 16. Tortillas with beans. In camps, stretching from Tucumcari to Barstow, tortillas warmed on griddles blackened from travel. A scoop of refried pintos spread across, folded once, and eaten hot from hand to hand. The smell of charred flour, the hiss of fat, and the quiet hum of tired voices made. Travelling west, even those new to the flavour found comfort in the softness, the warmth, and the way a single bite said, "You've arrived somewhere that still knows how to feed you." Meaning grew fast. What started as a roadside find became a daily habit, blending plains, thrift with border hospitality. A tortilla folded around beans didn't just fill stomachs, it taught travellers how to belong without losing themselves. 17. Tamales roadside stand. At crossroads and gas stops, a voice called, "Hot tamales," and steam lifted from buckets lined with corn husks. Inside, masa cradled bits of meat or seasoned beans. each packet sold by the dozen or by the handful. Camps opened tins, unwrapped the husks, and shared. Across knees and crates, tamales made sense because they were portable, cheap, and filling perfect for people who couldn't linger. Masa and chili stretched little into plenty, and families selling them along Route 66 earned what they could from travelers just like them. A dime's worth brought flavor, warmth, and the rare comfort of spice, meaning clung to the steam and the hush that followed first bites. Payday tamales were more than food, they were punctuation in the week, proof that something good could still find you at a dusty crossroad. Every campfire glowed brighter when a husk unwrapped. 18. Posole, hominy stew. In New Mexico towns and border camps, hominy simmered with pork trimmings or a ladle of red or green chili. The broth thickened as it cooled, corn kernels soft as beans, spice cutting through dust and fatigue. One pot fed all, ladled into tin cups and passed down the line. Hominy was cheap, canned or dry, chili grew everywhere, and pork scraps flavored without draining a wallet. This stew respected the Southwest and traveled easily with those who kept moving. It was rib-sticking, heat-giving, and dependable, each spoonful tasting of grit and gratitude. Meaning traveled west with the people who carried it. A dish once local became a migrant's linked to something certain. The scent of smoke, the glow of red broth, the reminder that even on the road, roots could ride along in the kettle. Summer. It made sense because markets sold seconds blemished squash, cut corn for pennies. Chili added flavor where meat could not, and every spoonful carried the sun of the day. Before, when weather broke and trucks still moved, farmers sometimes gave away what they couldn't sell, knowing it wouldn't last long anyway. Again. 20. Chili and crackers at missions, inside church basements, and relief halls. Long tables waited with tin ladles, paper bowls, and sleeves of crackers. The chili was thin but hot, seasoned enough to sting a little. A volunteer poured coffee, another wiped spills. Nobody asked where you came from, only if you'd had. Seconds. It made sense because missions had resources the road didn't. Stoves, donated goods, and volunteers who understood hunger firsthand. Canned beans, tomatoes, and chili powder built the stew. Crackers filled the spaces between. It was predictable, warm, and served with, once under their breath, mid-roll rehook, next the penny sweets, water pie miracles, and coffee that kept wheels turning toward California. 21. Oatmeal with molasses. Steam rose from dented pots as rolled oats thickened to a slow bubble. Then a ribbon of sorghum or molasses darkened the surface and glossed each spoonful. The smell was warm and grainy like toast without bread, and it stuck to ribs before wind and road dust. Had a chance to. A tin cup of coffee beside it turned breakfast into fuel, not just habit. It made sense because oats were cheap, steady, and forgiving. Water was all they asked for, and sweeteners lasted in jars far longer than butter or cream. A spoon of molasses softened bitterness and added calories without costing much. In camp after camp, someone saved the last drip in the can and scraped it clean. Meaning showed up in quiet bowls eaten around small fires. Oatmeal steadied hands, chilled from a night under canvas, and gave children something gentle to start with. Even on thin mornings, the shine of syrup across the top felt like a small promise. You'll make it to noon. 22. Vinegar pie. Water pie in a whisk. A cup of water, a splash of vinegar, sugar, and flour turned into a thin custard that set like magic in a hot oven. The top browned lightly, the inside cut clean, sweet with a tang that kept each bite lively. It tasted like a holiday had wandered into the weekday. It made sense because butter and eggs weren't always there, but staples were flour, sugar, water, a little vinegar from the back of a shelf. The chemistry did the rest, making silk from rags. Every slice proved a pantry could still surprise when money couldn't. Meaning lived in the hush before the first cut. Vinegar pie or water pie where vinegar ran. Enter text. 23. Depression wacky cake. Cocoa darkened the flour in a shallow pan, 3 finger wells took oil, water, and vinegar, and the whole thing whipped into a batter without a single egg or drop of milk. It baked into a springy, chocolate-scented square that cooled on a windowsill and drew every eye. It made sense because the recipe dodged rationing and scarcity. swapping butter for oil and eggs for a vinegar soda lift. Cocoa was cheaper than chocolate bars and travelled better. One pan meant fewer dishes, less fuel, and a cake that could be sliced with a pocket knife when plates ran short. Meaning flickered in birthday candles stuck straight into the crumb. Wacky cake turned lean weeks into moments worth circling on a calendar. A square wrapped in paper road along in pockets, reminding families that celebration didn't require plenty, only ingenuity and a good oven. Tired rooms. It made sense because seconds fruit sold cheap, windfalls were free, and dried prunes kept for months without fuss. A little sugar stretched a long way, and bread that had gone tough found a second life. No butter, no cream, just heat, patience, and a steady hand with the ladle. Meaning arrived as quiet thanks. After long days of dust and fences, soft fruit tasted like mercy. Children ate it fast. Elders took their time, the pot scraped clean, and someone always said they could smell their mother's kitchen again, if only for a minute. 25. Boiled coffee or chicory, barley substitute. A dented kettle rattled on the flame. Grounds went straight into the boil. When the bubbles calmed, the pot sat a moment so grit could sink. Poured careful into tin cups, the coffee came out black and sharp, the kind that warmed palms before it ever reached a mouth. It made sense because coffee mattered as much as food on cold mornings and long hauls. When beans ran out, roasted barley, wheat, or chicory stood in, offering colour, heat, and a suggestion of bitterness. A shared pot kept conversation moving and miles shorter. Meaning was the first sip and the silence after it. Coffee, or its mate-to-cousin, gathered people before decisions and after defeats. It cleared heads, steadied steps, and turned a camp into a circle. Even when thin, it tasted like tomorrow might be kinder. Across the Dust Bowl years, dinner came from discipline. Pots of pintos murmuring all day, cornmeal that became mush tonight and tomorrow's fried slices, and potatoes kissed brown at the edges. Government flour turned into biscuits under peppery milk gravy. SOUP bones. Perfumed kettles rich as paychecks, foraged greens, and garden rose filled gaps, and ash-baked onions or spuds meant supper without a pan to scrub. Ingenuity, not plenty, set the table. Route 66 mixed new flavors into the wagon. Tortillas with beans, roadside tamales, and hominy stews bright with red or green chili. Mission lines served chili and crackers with coffee, while camps pulled Mulligan kettles, so a handful became a meal. Cakes dodged scarcity. Wacky cake rose without eggs or milk, and pantry pies like vinegar or water pie put a holiday on thin weeks. Sweets were small, but morale ran larger. What held everything together were methods that multiplied comfort. Dumplings steamed over stew, skillet stretches that fed a crew, and hot cups that thawed hands before sunrise. Nothing was wasted. Stale bread met stewed apples, prunes plumped in, syrup, and drippings carried yesterday into tomorrow. These meals didn't make headlines. They made miles, fences, and the will to keep going when sky and soil said quit. If you could bring one back tonight, what would it be? Pinto beans, with cornbread, vinegar pie that tastes like persistence, a square of wacky cake for a birthday on a budget, or tortillas and beans shared around a lantern. Tell us the dish your family passed down, the trick that stretched it, and the story that turns thrift into comfort. Your memories keep this table set. Sources drawn from WPA and Relief Cookery pamphlets, Mission and Settlement House, menus, railroad and farm diaries, church, community cookbooks, and period newspapers across the Plains and Southwest 1930s. Names and methods shifted by county, crop, and season. Cooks swapped in what they had and left out what they didn't. Use these as portraits, not prescriptions, and honor the hands that made enough from almost nothing.